And now our engine is out and sitting over here on a table. We'll get to that in a little bit, but right now we're pulling the subframe. And one of these, it's really pretty straightforward. In the early time period, you're going to have these two bolts, these two mounting bolts through where the spring perch sits. Later cars will have a great big 1.25" type single bolt with a rubber mount in between the subframe and the body. This one's an early solid one. What we have is a chance to show separating a ball joint. These tapered fittings. You know, a lot of times you kind of end up beating them to death. You end up damaging the threads. You're wailing away with a hammer, putting a lot of load on everything else. Again, none of this stuff's rocket science. I don't want to pretend like I'm the only person who's ever thought of these things, but it's pretty easy to do some simple things to make all these tasks easier. So in this case, let me show you what I've done here. I've got this old screw jack, a little Jeep 4x jacks. I got a few of these laying around. And I set it up just at the right angle. A little bar metal here I use for a punch. That's what I use to separate my CV joints in this job here actually. But what I've done is I've supported the steering arm right next to the tapered fitting I'm trying to separate. The other side worked like a charm, so I thought, hey, let's take a look and see if we can show this real quick. We got our trusty ball peen hammer, and if I can avoid knocking the phone out of my hand or knocking the light down, usually when you support it this close, you're able to deliver, even if our jack fell over. Mission accomplished, one quick smack. Now we haven't done any damage to the threads, we haven't hurt anything else at all. Without this kind of support, what happens? People just loosen this up and start wailing on this. Well, that load that you deliver there is spread out among all these ball joints, springs, rebound buffers that are supporting the weight of the suspension at this point. And so you just end up getting frustrated and damaging things. This trick works pretty good. Any place you can get and put a hard support, like say we want to separate this guy here. You can support the arm very firmly into concrete, and that way when you give this a bit of impact, I've also got one of those impact hammers. That does a nice job when there's a tight clearance. But anyway, the subframe here is pretty much off. We've separated both sides of our steering. We don't have to worry about the column or the rack. That actually stays on the body. So as long as we've separated our brake lines here one way or another, and that's where we actually started this job. I started out changing those brake hoses and decided to kind of go for the rest of it. We mentioned those. There's two bolts on the body where the little hands support the floorboard. And then of course, you got the mounts right in front. I'm gonna put those tow hooks here to make this thing easier to put on a trailer. Several things to be addressed while we have a chance. Subframe should be out pretty quick. And sure enough, once all the mounting bolts, a couple of brake hoses and things are addressed, simply supporting the subframe. In our case here, I got a piece of 2x12 construction leftover, piece of 2x4 to kind of make everything descend evenly parallel to the ground and such. On a hydraulic jack, just carefully lowered it, keeping it from snagging sheet metal or whatever here and there. And in only a few minutes, the steering rack is off. It's hard to believe that they didn't allow access to change this rack. Either from inside the car, holes in the subframe, something, because that took about 5 minutes to remove after, of course, removing the engine. Oh gosh, the subframe, everything else. That just goes to show the one thing I didn't change when I rebuilt this car. But it's all out now. I can see, you know, side-by-side comparison, old and new, all the dimensions are correct. This is the close ratio. It's a replacement for the Cooper S, the correct type. So we'll probably bolt that up here pretty quick, address a few things on the subframe, and hopefully get this thing going back together. This will be a record for me. Usually I take my time on projects, as we've seen here. But in this case, it might go back together pretty quick.